So for those of you who are joining for the first time to one of these webinars, the AdTag on Indicators is organizing a series of webinars on different topics, on different specific indicators, and these are available from the AdTag website, which we'll post in the chat. And the metadata on all of the different indicators is also available on the SAPSTA website as information document 14. And so if you look at the guidance that is provided there, you can see that for every indicator in the Global Biodiversity Framework monitoring framework, there's a detailed methodology. And today we're going to be talking about the methodology for the indicator 7.2, which is on pesticides. This is one that has very much been developed recently over the last year and a half. So we're going to give you an update on the process to develop it and what this indicator currently looks like. So I'll hand over to Monica, who is with the Secretariat, and she works with us on our agriculture and biodiversity issues. And then we also have people from FAO who will be presenting some of the technical details. We have Kim Ann, who's online now, and Finbar, who's attempting to join. They work also in the agriculture and bioecology and biodiversity work on FAO. So I'll hand over to you, Monica.
Thanks, Gillian. Dear participants, dear colleagues, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have this webinar with all of you. I'd like to start by giving you a brief background on the Target 7 indicators. Target 7 on pollution currently has two headline indicators, one on eutrophication and one on pesticides. When the framework was adopted, the indicators on pesticide lacked a methodology. In this webinar, we'll discuss the progress on this particular indicator. However, there are still gaps in terms of monitoring Target 7 as a whole, given the broad scope of the target, and therefore monitoring Target 7 will involve multiple steps. For instance, number 1, rolling up the monitoring of indicators 7.1 and 7.2 on nutrients in pesticide. Number 2, improving the understanding and the ways to monitor the relationship between pollution and biodiversity across other pollutants. Yesterday, we participated in a webinar organized by Minamata and BRS Conventions to look at some other indicators that have been developed, but the need to improve our knowledge of the impacts of pollution on biodiversity remains, as it was identified in the analysis of the scientific and technical needs for the implementation of the framework in the document SAPSTA/26/3, and also in the AdTag gap analysis that you will find in the document SAPSTA/26/22/2 that you will be finding in the chat. Third, last but not least, making sure that this information is used for policy making. For instance, this could be used in the NDB-SAPS preparation and also in other plans, such as the agriculture plans. Now, before inviting our guests to present the indicator 7.2, I would like to give you some information about the pathway to develop this indicator. As you may know, in decision 15/5, the Conference of the Parties adopted the monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This monitoring framework included the headline indicator 7.2. At that time, it was called pesticide environmental concentration. This indicator was adopted without an agreed methodology. In the same decision, an ad hoc technical expert group on indicators, also known as AdTag, was established to support the work of the monitoring framework, including addressing critical gaps, in particular the headline indicators that did not have an existing methodology. So during the third ACTEC meeting that happened in October last year, the ACTEC noted that the methods for the headline indicator 7.2 were still missing. And they identified the need to establish an inclusive process to develop the indicator. They also agreed that a collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, would provide a way to progress this indicator. FAO kindly accepted this invitation, and in collaboration with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, decided to organize an expert meeting to discuss this indicator, as well as the component and complementary indicators related to pesticides. In November 2023, through notification 2023-127, CBD Secretariat opened a call for nominations. They chose the expert that would be part of this group to develop the methodology. We received more than 50 nominations, and the experts were selected based on some criteria. For instance, CV, also taking in account regional and gender balance, as well as relevant expertise and experience. Experts from countries, 3 per region, and experts from observers organizations were considered. Total of 20 experts, 4 facilitators, and some UN representatives joined the expert meeting in Rome from January 23 to 24 at FAO headquarters. The results of this meeting was provided to the ACTEC for its consideration during the 6th meeting in Cambridge, the UK, that happened a month ago. The ACTEC reported back to SBSTA, which will be part of the discussion in the upcoming SBSTA 26 in Nairobi next month. So now the headline indicator 7.2 is named Aggregated Total Applied Toxicity, and the FAO colleagues will present it today. Without further ado, I have a pleasure to invite Ms. Kim Templeman and Mr. Finbar Horgan to give this presentation. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Monica. Can you hear me? Thank you. I'm having a problem with my headphones. Clearly, it's a bit of a complicated technical day, so I hope that you can hear me well. My name is Kim Templeman, and together with my colleague Finbar Organ, we're very pleased to be here today to give you some more information as it relates to headline indicator 7.2. This is quite a complex topic, so we prepared a few slides to make it hopefully a bit easier to understand. So I'll be sharing my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes, but it's not on presentation mode, Kim.
Is it now?
No.
Still not. All right, let me try it this way. On my screen, it is in presentation mode, but I'm probably, 1 second. Excuse me, I'll do back. Let me see how to. No, I can only I put on my screen, it's on presentation mode, but for some reason it doesn't work on your end, right?
Yeah. Janice is saying that try to present in Teams at the top right hand of the PowerPoint app.
Top right hand. Let me try it once again. I'll stop sharing and I'll try to share the screen again.
How about sharing the presentation mode? Yeah, it works.
It works? Oh, fantastic. So apologies for this glitch. So we're here today to speak more into depth about the approach for measuring pesticide risk reduction, for which we will be talking about specifically headline indicator 7.2. So the outline of the presentation is as follows. We would first like to give you a little bit more background information on global pesticide use and its impacts, in particular on biodiversity. Then we did a mapping exercise in anticipation of the expert meeting on the current status of indicators to measure pesticide risk reduction, which we would like to share with you. And we will briefly talk about the expert meeting and what was discussed at that meeting, but Monica already gave quite some information there, so we could go rapidly through those slides. And finally, we'll go more into the technical details, and these will be presented by my colleague Finbar on the proposed ATAT indicator, its current status and the gaps that we are still facing, and how we could move forward to really ensure the functionality of the indicator and operationalize it. So just very briefly on the global pesticide use. So basically, pesticides are used everywhere. They are ubiquitous. Of course, in some areas, they are used more than in other areas. And according to a study by Maggi et al., 1 billion people are exposed to pesticides above acceptable levels. So this map shows the strong correlation between the use of pesticides, 80% of which are used in agriculture, and residues in soils, in particular topsoil. On this slide shows the discharge of agricultural pesticides into rivers and oceans. 82% of pesticides used in agriculture are biologically degraded. 10% remain as residue in soil, and 7.2% leaches below the root zone. And by contrast to their fate in soil, only 1.1% of pesticides that are entering rivers are degraded along streams, exceeding safety levels in more than 13,000 kilometers of river length, and resulting into the release of pesticide active ingredients into oceans. Herbicides represent a prevalent pesticide residue on both land and river outlets. And as you can see on this map, the discharge also affects coastal waters, which are areas that are very rich in biodiversity and have biodiversity-rich ecosystems. For example, coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass. So cropland is also a habitat for a diversity of animals, both resident and dispersing. And they often represent the only remaining habitat for endangered species. However, at the same time, in the diversity hotspots around the globe, pesticide trade increased by up to 450% since the year 2000, as you can see on the figure on your left. And just as a specific fact, so 30% of reptiles and 12% of amphibians in Asian rice fields are listed as vulnerable, critically endangered by IUCN. Sorry, just some additional information. So when we talk about diversity hotspots where pesticide trade increased, These are areas like hotspots, for example, in East Asia, also Southeast Asia and South Asia, but also in countries like Mexico. On this slide, on the right side, you can see that the increased use of herbicides has a large impact on the abundance, on the richness of weeds. And many of these weed species are actually wildflowers that are important for agriculture because they often provide a habitat to associated biodiversity species that are crucial for the production of food. On the left side, there's a graph on the use of pesticides, the increased use of herbicides actually in wheat croplands. And as you can see, with the increased use, the yield is actually declining. And so it's not necessarily that using herbicides can lead to higher yields. So now moving into the indicator context. So I just want to very briefly give an overview of what type of indicators are currently available to measure pesticide risk reduction. So all the indicators that are currently available are very data demand driven and can be very cumbersome to most countries. For some countries, such data is available, but for the majority, this data is not. And if you want to measure pesticide risk reduction by 2030 or by any year, they need to be representative and comparable, meaning that countries should be able to collect the same type of data as all other countries, basically. So at the moment, there are, as I mentioned, indicators available, such as the PEC, the Pesticide Environment Concentration Indicator, but its use, it has its limitations. And in terms of the PEC in particular, it includes the need for, basically it relies on very specific data from the USDA for selected crops. But this is why we mention here that it is limited in terms of its use, even if it's very useful to have an overall picture like you can see on this map that we presented earlier on. So then back to the expert meeting. So basically, the expert meeting was held to develop a methodology for headline indicator 7.2. As mentioned by Monica, so the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators was appointed at CBD COP15 through decisions 15/5 to operationalize the monitoring framework of the GBF. At the third meeting of the ATEC, FAO was invited to guide the development of a headline indicator for target 7B, which really relates to pesticide risk reduction, because that target, as you know, includes also different sources of pollution. Just to remind all the participants, headline indicators are mandatory for parties to report on, which is why it's important for them to be measurable. And so with this in mind, the CBD Secretariat and FAO convened the expert meeting on 23 to 24 January to ensure the usability of the headline indicator globally. As Monica mentioned, there was a selection process. 15 country-nominated experts were selected from all regions, and 12 experts attended the meeting. Up to 15 experts were nominated, could be nominated by international organizations and academia, and amongst the submissions, 8 experts were selected. I do wish to take the opportunity here to thank the European Union that funded the participation of the experts from the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries through the ASP-MEAS3 project. So just a quick reminder, so target 7 in a nutshell is about reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity by 2030. Target 7 point B, so our focus target, is about reducing the overall risk from pesticides and highly hazardous chemicals by at least half, including through integrated pest management based on science, taking into account food security and livelihoods. And as already mentioned by Monica, the headline indicator that was adopted at CBD COP15 with an asterisk, meaning that it was an indicator that still needed further development, was named at the time pesticide environment concentration. The ATAC was tasked with reviewing this indicator and giving advice on methodology development. So when we started the meeting, we first began by asking ourselves, what would be the ideal headline indicator to measure this target 7.B? So the experts had a clear preference for assessing pesticides' impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems, but soon they came to the conclusion that it was hard to get data. On risks related to pesticide use and toxicity, because this was considered to be the best equilibrium between relevance and feasibility. Basically, input data on pesticide availability and use of registered pesticides and their toxicity are considered to be among the most readily available. The experts also looked into environmental data on pesticide content in soil, water, and food, but also this was considered, this data collection is considered less frequent and difficult to obtain at global level. So with this background, I would now like to hand over the microphone to Finbar to go into the details as to the indicator development.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone in Montreal. So I'll just go through a few slides. One, just to reiterate why we moved away from pesticide environmental concentration, what is the TAT, or the total applied toxicity, and why we moved towards aggregated total applied toxicity. So Kim has already mentioned some of the issues around pesticide environmental concentration. Much of that work has been done recently through the University of Sydney. And some of the graphs that we've showed earlier on, including the effects of pesticides on earthworms globally, which is some very interesting output from these models, has been shown already and is very useful for understanding the environmental fate of pesticides. Now, the PEC, or the pesticide environmental concentration, as Kim had mentioned already, is based on dynamic and static data. And in this square here, you can see the dynamic data indicated in orange. So we have pest chem grids, crop grids, and weather data. And the static indicated in green. So in this case, for example, if we were looking at residue times of pesticides in the soil, you'd want to know about pesticide retention times, pesticide kinetics and the kinetics of the properties, root structures, soil profiles, and all these would be georeferenced. And then in the work that is available, published scientifically on PECs, you can see that they used up to 92 different active ingredients, and they visualize this on a graphing software, and you get these very nice graphs. Some of the problems arise in that, well, firstly, the information is, a lot of it is based on assumptions. So pest chem grids, where it's a fantastic sort of first estimate of pesticide use, is, as Kim had mentioned, based on USDA applications to 6 major crops and 4 aggregated croplands. And pesticide applications differ around the world quite considerably. So this needs to be sort of incorporated better. And also, all of this works in what's called the BRT sim computational environment. So it has a technical need. It's not that easy to operate. This is quite complicated. People can be trained to it, but it's not immediately available to most people. And thirdly, it's as I said, based on a lot of assumptions. So the expert group looked at this. Professor Maggi from University of Sydney and Fiona Tang, who've done a lot of this work, presented their results. And based on the data that was available, it was decided that we need to move to something a little bit more simpler, and certainly something that would reduce the amount of assumptions that needed to be made. Kim, next slide. Now, also among the experts was Ralf Schulz, and Ralf and his colleagues in Germany had developed what's called the TAT, or the Total Applied Toxicity. This is a very simple metric, and it is used to compare toxicity in the environment from chemicals based on the mass of chemicals in the environment, or the application rates, and the toxicity of the individual chemicals to a whole series of different species. So it's a very simple metric, and has been tested and has been published. I think we can probably move to the next slide, Kim. I should mention as well, perhaps, that there are two ways to calculate TAT. One is to use RTLs, and the other is to use actual toxicities. The RTLs, by using RTLs, dividing the mass by the RTL, that's the recommended RTL threshold level. You actually incorporate a risk, so you're only looking at things that are above the limits. But then RTLs are not available for all chemicals and for all species. But here you can see the application of TAT to compare toxicities to fish in Germany and the United States. So you can see there, for example, this is based on a whole series of pesticides with known toxicity levels to fish. And these are all summed together for each year. And you can see the trends over time. So from I think it was 1991 to 2000 in these graphs. And you see that for the US, based on the chemicals that were used, toxicity of fish declined, whereas in Germany, based on the chemicals that were used in the toxicity to fish, the overall total toxicity increased actually over that time period. So you can see the trends, and that means that it's fit for purpose, and it's also functional. And so it could be used by most countries straight away. Next slide, please. The data is available as well. So many of those countries, for example, Germany has records of pesticide use, so as the United States. And where data is missing, you may be able to, or you can estimate pesticide usage based on crop areas, normal chemical use, and then calibrate with the FAO stat data that indicates total pesticide use for a whole number of countries. And in terms of pesticide properties, pesticide property database is an excellent source. This was developed by the University of Hertfordshire. John Silivakis was present as one of our experts, and he's been heavily involved in developing this as well. And that includes information on over 700 metabolites or molecules and 2,500 pesticide products, each with about 300 different pesticide parameters. So it's full of information. And I'll come back to that again later on. Next slide, Kim. The problem we have with that is when you try to aggregate it for a single headline indicator value. So to look within a country, it's quite doable, but when you have a whole lot of different countries with different information and different climates and different species richness, etc., you start to incorporate some problems to be able to add things up. And this is why we moved over to what's called the aggregated total applied toxicity, or I suppose you could say the aggregatable total applied toxicity. So we have to have something that we can sum together to give an overall global assessment of total toxicity, and also to be able to monitor how we're reducing the risks to biodiversity from toxicity as related to pesticides. So that means that we have to incorporate a couple of things. One is we need to be able to normalize across countries for agricultural area, cropland, and the other is to somehow tweak the different species, because remember, these are the whole range of species included together, fish, birds, etc. But then different countries and different crops will have different exposures to these species, so we need to work out a mechanism to be able to make that value more representative. Next slide, Kim. So in terms of cropland area, well, that's very doable. Again, FAO Stat has information going back to the 60s on different crop areas in different countries. But in terms of biodiversity, a little bit more difficult. However, there is biodiversity data, of course, and many inventories conducted right around the world on biodiversity and the different richness and endemicities of different species across the world. But we have to, and this is one of the things that we'll be doing going forward, to look at how we actually make that practical and easy for the different members to operate. Next slide, Kim. So that was just a sort of a brief introduction. I'm sure we'll have many questions later, but where we need to go on moving forward, we need to standardize the parameters. So, for example, if countries are calculating their total applied toxicity and they have their pesticide levels, but they're all using different toxicity data, then you're not going to have, it's not going to be very easy to interpret what's going on. And these standards need to be held right across from the initial baseline period, which goes back to 2011 until the end of the exercise. Now, again, the University of Hertfordshire has been very helpful in this, and they have indicated that there may be a possibility, and they're certainly looking into it, to indicate in the pesticide property database which indicators countries can use specifically for the headline indicator, which is a great positive. The second thing we need to look at, as I mentioned before, was the weighting of groups. Weighting, for example, of pollinators versus aquatic organisms. You can imagine, for example, in a country that's 60% dedicated to rice, aquatic organisms and toxicities to aquatic organisms is going to be much more important to them, for example, than it would be for a dryland country. In the same vein, and sort of moving down towards the end there, we need to look at exposure to these organisms, diversity in regions. Now, if we develop the indicator that directly monitors reductions risk, we may be able to bypass that, and we're looking into that. The next thing is that pesticide use data, of course, is problematic. Most countries cannot tell you how much pesticide is used in country. We are looking, there are ways around this, of course, to fill in the gaps using modeling tools like PestChem grids. But also we're looking into improving the mechanisms for data capture by working directly with the countries and to improve the reporting. The TAT works very well for agricultural inputs, where we can get better understandings of application rates, application areas, pesticide used, all these things. And 80% of pesticide use is linked to agriculture, but we still have issues around how do we incorporate pesticide use in forestry, or in public health, for example, and this is something we'll be looking into going forward. And then finally, this needs further testing and verification, and we've been looking into possibilities to do this through ongoing projects at FAO, including under the ACP MAIS project. And next slide, Kim, I think it's back over to you.
Thank you, Finbar. Yes, it is.
Okay.
So just two final slides really about process and what you can expect also at subset 26. So in document CBD/substat/26/2 and in the Annex 2, there's an ATAC recommendation which refers to before the indicator, the headline indicator 7.2 can be operational, it requires further development. As mentioned by Finbar, as you saw in his last slide, there's still quite a few things to look into. And it invites or it proposes that the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, so FAO, could convene a working group to finalize and test the aggregated total applied toxicity indicator and support this indicator. And Finbar also there mentioned possible areas of support that we've been looking into. Then the last slide, I just wanted to provide you an overview of the documents related to all the work that has been done so far on this headline indicator. So at Substat 26, all these documents are now available online. So there's the, of course, the main document, the main official document, the monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is document CBD/Substat/26/2, which includes information on, again, headline indicator 7.2. Then there is the expert group meeting report with all the details that we might have left out also today of what was discussed, how we came to the recommendations. And this is provided in an InfDoc, in an information document number 18. And then there's information document 14, which includes guidance by the ATEC on using the indicators of the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And it has the metadata sheet for headline indicator 7.2. So this data sheet has been was also developed following, or further developed, I must say, following the expert meeting. So at Substat 26, the ATEC co-chairs will provide an update on their intersessional work of the group. And contracting parties will be enabled to consider ATEC work and its implications on indicators, and then recommendations will be prepared for CBD COP16. So this is all in terms of headline indicator 7.2, still work in progress, but we've made really huge steps over the past couple of months, and we sincerely hope that, that by COP16 we will have an headline indicator that is both functional and operational. Thank you on behalf of FAO and of all the experts, I assume, that were part of this this intense exercise, and that are all on this picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think that the amount of work that has been done has been really amazing in terms of building this out. While we're waiting for additional questions, I was wondering if you mentioned at the beginning that there was a review also of additional complementary indicators that could be related to pesticides, and I was wondering if you could provide some sort of update on what that looked like from your perspective. Thanks.
Finbar, would you like to answer that question? I'll just, so at the expert meeting, we briefly did look into complementary indicators, and we did not finalize that list, or but we did discuss a number of them, and I think in the intersessional work between Substat 26 and COP16, this is something also that that we can further work upon. Finbar, anything to add maybe?
Yeah, I would agree. We did look at a number of indicators. There are many indicators out there. Many of them are in use in different parts of the world or for different purposes. Most of them are based on the same main input data. That's the amount of pesticide applied and the toxicities. Some include details, other details related to human health risks, etc. So indeed we did, in terms of including them on complementary lists. We certainly would include PEC as a complementary indicator. Going forward, this using the computational environment developed in Sydney would help countries to disaggregate pesticide use tremendously within countries, particularly the larger countries. So you can imagine pesticide use in Brazil, one blanket figure isn't very useful in terms of mitigating damage. That would be one that certainly would be included as a complementary indicator. And I think most of the others, we have, for example, we saw quite a lot of information on pesticide load indices from the UK and Denmark that work very, very well in those countries and are certainly useful to look into. I think it's important to remember as well that what we're looking for is a headline indicator that assesses changes in risk over time, and that has a very specific function. And countries will definitely want to go further, actually, in trying to deal with pesticide issues and risks to biodiversity by adopting many of these other indicators. We also remember that we're talking about, for developing this indicator, we're talking about 9 to 15 different acute and chronic toxicities to a selection of organisms. But in the UK, I can't remember exactly how many, but you can go up to, I suppose, 20, 30, 40 different organisms, and pesticides will affect them all in different ways. So it's important to look at the different load indicators as well, and all of these should be included as complementary indicators.
Thank you so much. I think this is really useful as well. I mean, Monica mentioned that we're exploring opportunities for measuring different aspects of pollution, not just pesticides, right? So this work on mercury, there's work on different chemicals with the BRS convention. And so I think that this indicator provides a good example of how you could explore this for not only pesticides, but for others as well. There's a question in the chat on, I guess the question really is, how receptive is this indicator to looking at reducing risk through management practices? Or I guess, how does this indicator inform policy? Is that another question from sort of the same angle?
Maybe shall I start, Finmar? And
Sure.
so in terms of thank you, Ms. Clark, for your comment. I see it in the chat. Yes, there are opportunities to reduce risk through management practices. And here, as to how to incorporate it into the ATED, that's another discourse. Maybe I'll leave that one to Finmar. But integrated pest management practices. So looking for alternatives to that are not toxic or less toxic than the pesticides that are being used. Promoting also ecosystem-based practices in agriculture, promoting approaches such as, for example, in rice, sustainable rice intensification, where you use less water. So there are a series of agroecological practices that can serve as alternatives to pesticides and reduce pesticide risk. How to capture this within the ATAT? Any ideas? At the moment, I believe it is not specifically captured, but I do think that it would be worth looking into, because also the target itself really has a specific reference to IPM, Integrated Pest Management. And if you look at target 10, which is about the sustainable agriculture target, also there's a strong encouragement for to increase the use of agroecological practices. So.
Yeah, this issue was raised in the meeting by the experts. There are other complementary indicators that do take into account possible mitigation and management issues. The OECD, for example, has developed indicators specifically for this. Remember, I think it's worthwhile remembering back to one of Kim's early slides, with the turtle there, indicating how much biodiversity is in cropland. So it is very difficult to protect wildlife in cropland when we're blanket spraying, and mostly now this is what's happening. So I think the indicator in itself is going to, there may be sort of areas of error around the indicator, but it is going to capture the impacts on most of the biodiversity. But again, these are things that can be raised in the upcoming meeting, and we'll be looking into it. But I think the best way to look at this is to do it through the complementary indicators, and we will be directing people towards the OECD indicators for looking at management and reducing risk to biodiversity through management actions.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing amount of work that has been done. I think Monica was going to come in real quickly.
Yes, thank you so much, Finbar and Kim. I just saw that Mr. Gu is connected. Mr. Gu, not wanting to put you on the spot, but if you would like to say some words, because Mr. Gu is the team lead on the pesticide and the management and the plant protection division in FAO, and he's pretty much supporting this work. So I don't know if you would like to say a few words. I think he's connected, right? No?
I
Okay.
see his name, but
Yeah, if not, let's maybe move to the question. I think there's another question in the chat, Jillian.
yeah, so the question is it's in the Q&A, so I apologize, Finbar, if you're not seeing it, you kind of have to go back and forth between both. But it's asking about the persistence of the substances in the environment being taken into account. So how is accumulation taken into account whenever you're calculating this indicator? Thanks.
Okay, yeah, this is again another issue. This can be taken into account by looking at chronic toxicities to the major species groups that will be looked at. So, for example, if you're looking at fish, or let's make it easier and look at terrestrial invertebrates, for example, we have acute toxicities and we have chronic toxicities. And the chronic toxicities is one of the ways that we can include the sort of the long-term or low dose effects on organisms. So it is taking into account the retention time of the chemicals. Again, these are things that, and this I would say as well, going back to the pesticide property database, this type of information is available there, and we need to see how do we capture it best in the calculations for the TAT as we propose them going forward. Again, we're very lucky there to have in the expert group, John Silvakis, who's been working on this, and Lars Neumeister as well, who've been working on this for a long time to guide us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. So perhaps we will wrap up. I would like to remind people that we are doing additional indicator webinars, as you heard. And we also have a lot of information that's available. And as was mentioned, this is still a work in progress. Maybe I'll ask James Williams if he would like to close off the meeting. He has joined today. He's the chair, one of the co-chairs of the ATAG. And so over to you, James.
Thank you very much indeed, Gillian. Thank you, Finbar. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim. A wonderful amount of work. Really appreciate the support from FAO on this indicator. It's made an enormous difference to being able to make progress on this one in particular. Yes, there's more to do, but I actually think that an enormous amount of progress has been made, and really grateful to you and colleagues for all of the work to make that happen, and also for presenting in this webinar series, because it's the sort of thing that I hope will help parties to understand the detail, and there's a lot of detail in all of these indicators. There is one final question that seems to have just come in just as I came online here from Bob Tansey. Anyone with slides or other information illustrating how practices and policies can reduce pesticide, other pollution while maintaining production, send those around by email. I think that's a more general request for information, but if you want to respond to that, Finbar, please do.
I didn't quite get it, but it's Other information. Yeah, I think, you know, so I guess the question there is making some sort of link between pesticide use and production. And I think this is the first thing that we have to bear in mind, that that link is very tenuous. There's a lot of information to indicate that up to 90% of pesticide use in some crops is unnecessary. So, you know, I think the main thing, of course, that this pesticide indicator will do is to try to reduce toxicity. And there are a number of chemicals that are currently sort of earmarked for a major vehicle for risk reduction. And these are the highly hazardous pesticides. These are the most toxic chemicals, and we're hoping that these will be used less and less in the future. And this indicator will indicate that change. All of these chemicals have alternatives that are used in different crops. So moving away from the highly hazardous pesticides, the highly toxic ones, to less toxic ones if need be, is already going to reduce risks. So that's a management shift in pesticide use. But the other thing, of course, is to reduce usage. I mean, if you think about, you know, you spray a field for insects early in the season before the insects are there, and you spray the whole field, you're going to be spraying, you know, 90 or 99% of the spray is not hitting any target. So these kind of things can definitely reduce toxicity. And if we're going to get better, for example, precision applications, that will be indicated in this indicator, because we're looking at the mass of pesticide applied. So yes, Cleanup Act in terms of the toxicity and the usage of the pesticides should be reflected in this indicator. I hope that answers the question.
In food production, if you get it right.
And increase the profitability for farmers, which is very important as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all very, very much indeed.
Okay, so the next webinars that we will have, there's webinars on Monday and Tuesday. So you're welcome to join the webinars that we're having next week. The one that we're having on the first one will be on invasive alien species next week on the 23rd, and then we will have one. Oh, sorry, it's on Monday. And then we will have one on the 24th on the finance indicators. So we hope that you will see you again, and the recording will be online on the webpage as well. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.